Powerful CEO makes shocking threat. Satisfy me tonight or sign the divorce papers. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The Raymond Plaza Tower stretched into the Manhattan skyline like a steel and glass monument to power. On the 68th floor, April Carter Montgomery stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her husband's office, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over New York. Her reflection stared back at her, elegant in a tailored crimson dress, her natural hair styled in an intricate updo, every inch the perfect CEO's wife. But her eyes told a different story. "You haven't answered my question, April." Samuel Montgomery's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. He sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, his perfectly pressed Tom Ford suit a armor of authority. April's hand tightened around her champagne flute, the expensive bubbly, now warm and flat. The celebration of Montgomery Tech's latest acquisition had ended hours ago, but here they were, locked in another battle of wills. "I heard you the first time, Samuel. I'm choosing not to respond to ultimatums." "It's a simple choice." His voice carried that familiar tone, the one he used to close million-dollar deals, to bend boards of directors to his will. "Either you prove your commitment to this marriage tonight, or we end it. Clean, simple, efficient." He picked up a leather portfolio from his desk, opened it with deliberate slowness. "The papers are ready." April turned from the window, studying the man she'd married 3 years ago. Samuel Montgomery was still breathtakingly handsome at 42. Salt and pepper, hair perfectly styled, dark eyes intense, jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Once, that power had attracted her. Now, it felt like chains. "Do you remember?" she began, her voice soft but steady. "When you came to my firm's charity gala, you weren't a client, you weren't even invited. You just showed up because you'd heard about the brilliant young lawyer who was revolutionizing pro bono work in underserved communities." Samuel's expression flickered. "That's not relevant to—" "I was giving a speech about justice, about dignity, about how every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their circumstances." April set down her champagne flute, the crystal making a delicate ring against the glass coffee table. "You said it was my passion that drew you in. That fire, you called it. People change. Priorities change." "Yes, they do." April smoothed her dress, a gesture that had become a nervous habit. "I changed. I gave up my practice to support your vision, to be the perfect corporate wife, to throw the perfect parties and sit on the perfect charitable boards." Samuel stood, his movements controlled but tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "I never asked you to give up your career." "No, you just made it impossible to keep it. Every time I had an important case, there was a crucial business dinner. Every pro bono client became an embarrassment to the Montgomery name." April's voice remained calm, but her words carried years of accumulated pain. "Until eventually, I convinced myself that loving you meant becoming whatever you needed me to be. I need a wife who understands her role in this family, in this legacy." Samuel moved around the desk, each step measured. "Someone who doesn't throw private matters into the public eye, who doesn't challenge every decision I make." April felt her heart rate quicken as he approached, but she held her ground. This was the dance they'd been doing for months, his intimidating presence, her forced submission. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something inside her had finally cracked open. "The papers," she said quietly. "Show them to me." Surprise flickered across Samuel's face, quickly masked by satisfaction. He reached for the portfolio, extending it toward her with the confidence of a man who had never lost a negotiation. "Once you sign, we can discuss a generous settlement." April took the portfolio, its leather cool against her fingers. She opened it slowly, scanning the legal document inside. 3 years of marriage reduced to clinical terms and dollar amounts. Her eyes caught on a particular clause, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips. A non-disclosure agreement, really, Samuel? Standard procedure, the Montgomery name. Must be protected, of course. April closed the portfolio with a snap. You know what I realized today? When you delivered your little ultimatum? Samuel's eyebrow arched, a gesture she once found charming. Now it just seemed condescending. I realized that I've spent 3 years trying to prove myself worthy of your love. 3 years dimming my light so yours could shine brighter. April's voice grew stronger with each word. But that's not love, Samuel. That's ownership, and I'm not property. She set the portfolio back on his desk, retrieved her purse from the nearby chair. Samuel watched her, his expression unreadable. Where are you going? To the Children's Hope Foundation Gala, the one you said was beneath your attendance. April's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she moved toward the door. And tomorrow I'll have my lawyer review these papers. But tonight? She paused, hand on the doorknob. Tonight, I'm going to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Montgomery. April, his voice held a warning. If you walk out that door, you'll what? She turned, meeting his gaze directly. File for divorce? Go ahead, but understand this. I'm not walking out because you gave me an ultimatum. I'm walking out because for the first time in years, I remember that I deserve better than being given one. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Samuel Montgomery alone in his tower of power, facing something he hadn't encountered in years, a situation he couldn't control. In the private elevator, April's composure finally cracked. Her hands trembled as she pressed the lobby button, and she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored walls. Tears threatened to fall, but she blinked them back. No more crying over a man who saw love as a business transaction. Her phone buzzed, with a text from Maggie. Still coming to the gala, could use your help with the donors. April took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and typed back, on my way. And Maggie, I have a story to tell you. The elevator descended, each floor taking her further from the life she'd built with Samuel. But for the first time in years, it felt less like falling and more like flying. The night air beckoned, promising freedom, promising change, promising a chance to rediscover the woman who had once stood before crowds and fought for justice with fire in her heart. She stepped out into the Manhattan night, the city's energy thrumming through her veins. Behind her, the Raymond Plaza Tower reached toward the stars, its windows gleaming like 1,000 watching eyes. But April Carter, not Montgomery, not tonight, didn't look back. She had an event to attend, a self to reclaim, and a future to rewrite. On her own terms. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with the elegant chaos of a high-society charity event. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over New York's elite as they mingled, their jewelry catching and throwing sparkles across the gilded walls. But Maggie Thompson's attention was fixed solely on the woman who had just walked through the ornate double doors. April? Maggie weaved through the crowd, her emerald gown swishing against the marble floor. She'd known April long enough to read the subtle signs of distress beneath her friend's composed exterior. What happened? April accepted the glass of water a passing waiter offered, took a careful sip. Samuel gave me divorce papers tonight. He what? Maggie's voice rose sharply, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. She lowered it to a fierce whisper. That arrogant son of a... Not here, April cut in, nodding toward an elderly couple approaching them. With practiced grace, she turned to greet them. Dr. and Mrs. Blackwood, I'm so glad you could make it. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of social obligations. April moved through the crowd with the poise she'd perfected as Mrs. Montgomery, but each interaction felt different now. The weight of maintaining Samuel's image no longer pressed down on her shoulders. When she laughed, it was genuine. When she spoke about the Children's Hope Foundation's latest initiatives, her natural passion shone through. Finally, she and Maggie found a quiet moment in one of the ballroom's tucked-away alcoves. "Spill," Maggie demanded, settling onto a velvet-upholstered settee. "Everything." April sank down beside her friend, the events of the evening spilling out in a quiet rush. With each word, the reality of her situation became clearer, more solid. He actually expected me to beg Mags, to prove myself worthy of staying Mrs. Samuel Montgomery. Maggie's expression darkened. "I never liked him. Even at your wedding, something felt off. The way he watched you during your vows, like he was acquiring an asset instead of marrying a woman. I was so blind." April pressed her fingers to her temples. Or maybe I just wanted to be blind. The signs were there from the beginning, the subtle criticisms, the way he'd undermine my confidence while pretending to support me. "You weren't blind," Maggie corrected firmly. "You were in love. There's a difference. And let's be honest, Samuel Montgomery is a master manipulator. He didn't show his true colors until he thought he had you completely under his control." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the orchestra, starting up in the main ballroom. April closed her eyes, letting the familiar melody wash over her. Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, second movement. She'd chosen it specifically for this portion of the evening. "Remember when we used to listen to classical music during our all-night study sessions in law school?" Maggie asked softly. "You always fell asleep halfway through, drooling on your constitutional law textbook." April smiled at the memory. "God, I miss those days. Everything seemed so clear then. Fight for justice, give voice to the voiceless. You can have that clarity again, you know." Maggie reached over, squeezed her friend's hand. "The April Carter I know doesn't let anyone dim her light, not even a billionaire tech mogul with control issues." Before April could respond, a new voice joined their conversation. "April Carter, I thought that was you at the podium earlier." Both women looked up to find Jordan Walker standing in the alcove's entrance. He was exactly as April remembered him, tall and athletic, in his perfectly tailored suit, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that made everyone feel like an old friend. The years had added subtle touches of grey at his temples, but they only enhanced his natural gravitas. "Jordan." April stood, surprised by how steady her voice remained. "I didn't know you were in New York. Flew in yesterday for a series of meetings about expanding our youth education programs." He stepped forward, hands in his pockets, a casual gesture that somehow made him seem more approachable despite his imposing height. "When I heard about the gala, I had to come. The Children's Hope Foundation's work with underserved communities is exactly the kind of initiative we're looking to partner with." Maggie glanced between them, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "I should check on the silent auction. Jordan, make sure she takes a break from working the room, will you? She's been on her feet all night." Before April could protest, Maggie had slipped away, leaving her alone with a man who represented everything she'd given up when she became Mrs. Montgomery. "Your speech was incredible," Jordan said, settling into one of the alcove's chairs. "Passionate, articulate, inspiring, just like in law school. Though I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you back in the advocacy world. Last I heard, you'd stepped away from legal work." April sank back onto the settee, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. "It's complicated. Isn't it always?" His tone was gentle, free of judgment. "I followed your career, you know. The cases you took on, the precedents you set. When you suddenly disappeared from the legal scene, a lot of people wondered why, but it wasn't my place to ask. And now..." April met his gaze directly. "Is it your place now?" Jordan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Now I'm asking as someone who remembers a brilliant young lawyer who once told me that justice isn't just a concept, it's an action, a choice we make every day." He paused, studying her face. "What happened to her, April?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She'd asked herself the same thing countless times over the past 3 years, but hearing it from Jordan, who knew her before, who had witnessed her passion firsthand, made it impossible to dodge. "She got lost," April admitted quietly. "But I think she might be finding her way back." Jordan's expression softened. "Need a guide. My organization is always looking for legal minds who understand both corporate law and social justice. No pressure, just options." The offer hung in the air between them, full of possibility. 3 hours ago, April would have dismissed it immediately, worried about Samuel's reaction. Now, "I should get back to the gala," she said, rising. But she didn't move toward the ballroom. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card, one she hadn't used in years. "But maybe we could discuss those partnership opportunities for the foundation over coffee." Jordan took the card, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. "I'd like that." As April walked back into the crowded ballroom, she felt lighter somehow. The evening that had started with an ultimatum was ending with an opportunity. Not a romantic one. She wasn't ready for that, might not be for a long time, but something equally powerful, a chance to reclaim her purpose. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Samuel's name flashed on the screen, along with a message that made her heart race. "Coming to the gala. We need to talk." April stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into her clutch without responding. Let him come. Let him see her in her element, surrounded by people who valued her mind and her passion, not just her ability to play the perfect wife. The orchestra had moved on to Tchaikovsky now, the music swelling through the ballroom like a tide of emotion. April straightened her shoulders and moved into the crowd, ready to face whatever came next. She was done proving herself to Samuel Montgomery. It was time for him to prove himself to her. Samuel Montgomery's arrival at the Plaza Hotel created the kind of ripple that money and power always did in New York society. Conversations paused, heads turned, and the crowd parted instinctively as he strode through the grand entrance. His dark expression suggested a storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. April noticed the shift in the room's energy before she saw him. She was deep in conversation with a group of potential donors, articulating her vision for expanding the Children's Hope Foundation's legal aid program to multiple states. The words flowed naturally, powered by a passion she'd almost forgotten she possessed. Studies show that early legal intervention in custody cases can reduce the likelihood of children entering the foster system by up to 60%, she was saying, her voice clear and confident. "What we're proposing is a network of dedicated family law practitioners who—" "April." Samuel's voice cut through her presentation like a blade. She turned slowly, maintaining her composure. Samuel stood a few feet away, his presence commanding as always in his black tie attire. But something was different. A slight dishevelment in his usually perfect appearance, his bow tie slightly askew, a hint of tension around his eyes, suggested he'd left the office in a hurry. "Samuel." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. You were quite clear about your disinterest in this event." The donors exchanged glances, sensing the tension. A silver-haired woman in a designer gown touched April's arm. "We should let you two talk. But April, dear, I'd love to hear more about this initiative. Perhaps over lunch next week." "I'd like that, Mrs. Vanderholt." April smiled warmly, pulling a card from her clutch. "My personal number is on here. Call any time." Samuel's jaw tightened at the exchange. Once the donors had moved away, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need to discuss what happened in my office." "No, we don't." April took a deliberate sip of her champagne. "You made your position quite clear. I made mine equally clear. You're making a scene by doing my job, by raising money for children in need." So she gestured to the crowded ballroom. "Look around, Samuel. Everyone here is working towards something bigger than themselves. When was the last time you did that?" His expression darkened. "Don't lecture me about contribution to society. Montgomery Tech employs thousands and makes billions." April cut him off softly. "Yes, I know. The Montgomery legacy. Tell me, when did that become more important than actually living?" Before he could respond, Jordan Walker appeared at April's side. "Everything okay here?" His tone was friendly, but carried an undercurrent of protectiveness. Samuel's gaze shifted between them, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Jordan Walker, I wasn't aware you were back in New York. Just got in yesterday." Jordan smiled easily. "April and I were just discussing some potential collaborations between our organizations. Her vision for expanding legal aid services is exactly what this city needs." April watched as Samuel processed this information. She could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the realization that she was already making moves he hadn't anticipated. "My wife's passion projects are admirable," Samuel said smoothly, "but perhaps we should discuss any major commitments as a couple first." Ex-wife. The words left April's mouth before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. "That's what you want, isn't it? You made that very clear with your ultimatum and those divorce papers." Several nearby guests turned at this, poorly concealing their interest. Samuel's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly. "This isn't the place. Actually, it's the perfect place." April set down her champagne glass. "Because here, surrounded by people who actually care about making a difference, I can finally see clearly. You don't want a wife, Samuel. You want an ornament. Something pretty to display at business functions and lock away when it's not needed." Jordan took a subtle step back, giving them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Around them, the gala continued, but there was an undeniable audience now, watching the drama unfold from behind raised glasses and whispered conversations. "You're oversimplifying things," Samuel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everything I've done has been for us, for our future." "No." April's voice was firm but quiet. "Everything you've done has been for you, for your image, for your legacy." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "When was the last time you asked me about my dreams, my legacy? I gave you everything, except the one thing I actually needed." She stepped closer, close enough to see the confusion in his eyes. "Respect, Samuel. The simple respect of seeing me as a partner, not a possession." The orchestra chose that moment to begin a new piece, the same Beethoven symphony that had been playing earlier. The familiar melody wrapped around them like a reminder of everything April had rediscovered tonight. "I loved you," she continued, her voice softening. "Enough to dim my own light, to reshape myself into what you wanted. But that's not love, is it? That's surrender, and I'm done surrendering." Samuel reached for her arm, but she stepped back smoothly. "April, please." "Mr. Montgomery." Jordan's voice was polite but firm as he stepped forward. "I think it's a time you left." For a moment Samuel looked like he might argue. His gaze swept the room, taking in the watching crowd, the whispered conversations, the potential damage to his carefully cultivated image. Finally, he straightened his jacket. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," April agreed, "but it's different now. If you want to talk, it'll be with my lawyer present." And Samuel, she met his gaze one last time. "The next time you give someone an ultimatum, remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be the one without control. He turned and left, his exit as noticed as his entrance had been. April felt dozens of eyes on her, heard the murmur of conversations starting up again. But for the first time in years, she didn't care about managing perceptions or maintaining appearances. Maggie appeared, at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "You okay?" April took a deep breath, surprised to find that she was. More than okay, actually. She felt free. "You know what? I think I finally am." "Good." Maggie squeezed her shoulder. "Because we still have donors to impress, and nothing impresses old money like a woman who stands up to old power." April laughed, the sound genuine and unreserved. Around them the gala continued, but everything felt different now. The air seemed clearer, the music sweeter, the future brighter. She had faced Samuel Montgomery in his element, surrounded by power and privilege, and she hadn't backed down. More importantly, she had remembered who she was. Not just Mrs. Montgomery, but April Carter, lawyer, advocate, fighter. And this was just the beginning. The Montgomery penthouse felt cavernous at 3 a.m. Samuel stood at his usual spot by the window wall, Manhattan's lights twinkling below like fallen stars. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. In the reflection of the glass, he could see the ghost of April's presence in every corner, her favorite reading chair, the abstract painting she'd insisted would perfect the space, the grand piano she played when she thought no one was listening. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his PR team, no doubt scrambling to contain the fallout from tonight's scene at the gala. He ignored it, instead pulling up the photo gallery on his phone, scrolling through the carefully curated images of their life together. April at charity events, board meetings, company galas, always smiling, always perfect, always performing. The scotch burned his throat as he took another sip. He'd built an empire by anticipating every move, controlling every variable. But tonight, for the first time in years, someone had genuinely surprised him. "Everything you've done has been for you," she'd said. The words echoed in his mind, sharp as broken glass. The sound of his glass shattering against the wall surprised even him. Across town, in Maggie's Upper West Side brownstone, April sat, curled in a window seat, watching the same city lights. Her gala dress lay draped over a nearby chair, replaced by borrowed silk pajamas that felt like armor after the evening's emotional battles. "You know you can stay as long as you need," Maggie said, returning from the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. "The guest room is yours." "Just for tonight." April accepted the mug gratefully. "Tomorrow I'll check into a hotel." "Like hell you will." Maggie settled into an armchair. "You're staying here until you figure out your next move. And before you argue, remember who got you through the bar exam. I can outlast any objection." April's phone lit up with a text from Samuel. "We need to talk, properly. No lawyers, no audience, just us." "Don't respond," Maggie advised, seeing April's expression. "Not tonight. Not without legal representation. First thing tomorrow, we're calling Rebecca Chen." "The divorce attorney?" April's hands tightened around her mug. "Isn't she a bit aggressive?" "She's the best. And trust me, you'll need aggressive. Samuel's not going to let go easily, especially not after tonight." Maggie leaned forward. "You embarrassed him, honey. Men like him don't handle embarrassment well." April's phone buzzed again. This time it was Jordan. "Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Also, my board is very interested in that partnership we discussed. No pressure, but when you're ready to talk details, I'm here." This message she did respond to. "Thank you for everything tonight. Let's talk next week." Another text from Samuel appeared. "You're making a mistake. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future. Don't throw that away over one bad night." April started typing. It wasn't one bad night, Samuel. It was 3 years of bad nights, 3 years of dimming my light, 3 years of choosing. Your dreams over mine. Her finger hovered over the send button before she deleted the message. He didn't deserve an explanation. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. You know what I want? April said finally, turning to Maggie. I want to reactivate my law license. I think it's time April Carter returned to the courtroom. Maggie's face split into a wide grin. Now that's the kind of decision that calls for something stronger than tea. She stood, heading for the kitchen. I think I have a bottle of champagne somewhere. The good kind, not that overpriced stuff Samuel always insisted on. Alone for a moment, April looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there in a luxury penthouse, her husband was probably plotting his next move, thinking of ways to regain control. Let him plot. She had spent 3 years being the perfect Mrs. Montgomery. Now it was time to remember how to be April Carter. And April Carter had never lost a case she believed in. This would be her most important case yet. The case for her own freedom, her own identity, her own future, and she intended to win. The sound of a champagne cork popping made her smile. Some decisions deserved celebration. Some moments of clarity were worth marking. Some endings were really beginnings in disguise. Behind her, the city lights twinkled like possibilities, and for the first time in years, the future looked bright with promise instead of heavy with obligation. Rebecca Chen's corner office overlooked Central Park, the autumn leaves creating a tapestry of red and gold below. The attorney sat behind her glass desk, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit, reviewing the divorce papers Samuel had prepared. Well, she said, setting down the documents with a slight smile, Mr. Montgomery certainly has an inflated sense of his own generosity. April shifted in her chair, aware of Maggie's supportive presence beside her. What do you mean? This settlement offer? Rebecca tapped the papers with one manicured finger. It's designed to look generous, while actually leaving you with very little long-term security. The house in the Hamptons, the art collection, a substantial monthly allowance, but no voting shares in Montgomery Tech, no seat on the foundation board, and a non-disclosure agreement that would essentially prevent you from practicing law in New York. He can't do that, Maggie interjected. Can he? He can try. Rebecca leaned back, studying April. The question is, what do you want? April took a deep breath. I want my life back, my career, my voice, my identity. Then let's get it. Rebecca pulled out a fresh legal pad. Tell me everything, and I mean everything. Every business dinner you attended, every donor you brought in, every connection you made that benefited Montgomery Tech. We're going to show that you weren't just a wife. You were a partner in building his empire. Across town, Samuel sat in his own corner office, facing a different kind of battle. His PR team had assembled, armed with tablets and worry lines. The video is trending, his head of communications reported grimly. Clips from the gala are all over social media. The narrative isn't good. People are calling you controlling, manipulative. The women's blogs are having a field day. Samuel pinched the bridge of his nose. Handle it. It's not that simple. April's history as a civil rights attorney is resurfacing. People are sharing old articles about her pro bono work, her advocacy for underprivileged communities. They're asking why she stopped practicing law after marrying you. Plant some stories, Samuel snapped, about her enjoying the social life, choosing to step back. That would backfire spectacularly. A new voice joined the conversations as Linda Palmer, his longest-serving board member, strode into the office. The more you try to control this narrative, the worse you'll look. Samuel's jaw tightened. Linda, I've known you for 20 years, Samuel. You're brilliant with technology, with business. But this, she gestured to the PR team's reports. This is a different kind of battle, and you're losing it. Back in Rebecca's office, April was finding her voice. I organized the Tech Education Initiative, she said, warming to Rebecca's strategy. Connected Montgomery Tech with inner city schools. Got the Board of Education on board. Samuel took all the credit, but it was my project from start to finish. Rebecca's pen moved rapidly across her legal pad. Good. What else? The Asian market expansion. I spent months cultivating relationships with potential partners, hosting dinners, learning Mandarin. You speak Mandarin? Rebecca looked up, sharply. Yes, I learned while helping a Chinese immigrant family with their asylum case, back when I was practicing. Samuel saw how it helped with business connections and encouraged me to focus on that instead of legal work. Rebecca's smile turned predatory. Perfect. We can use all of this. April's phone buzzed. Another message from Jordan. Board approved the partnership proposal. Full funding for legal aid expansion. When you're ready to discuss details. She showed the message to Rebecca, who nodded appreciatively. Keep that channel open. It shows you're professionally valuable beyond your connection to Samuel. The day continued in parallel tracks. April building her case for independence, while Samuel tried desperately to maintain control. By evening, both had made decisions that would change everything. We'll file our own divorce petition, Rebecca announced, before he can lock you into his terms. But first, she slid a business card across the desk. Call this number. It's the managing partner at Caldwell and Ross. They're looking for someone to head their new social justice division. April stared at the card. You think I'm ready? I think you're overqualified. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Don't let 3 years of playing the perfect wife make you forget who you are. Meanwhile, Samuel sat alone in his office, Linda Palmer's parting words echoing in his mind. You have 2 choices. Keep fighting and lose everything, or learn to let go and maybe salvage something worth keeping. His phone showed a draft message to April, unsent. I'm sorry, I didn't see what I was doing to you. He deleted it. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't fix what he'd broken. Instead, he called his lawyer. The divorce papers, he said quietly. I want to revise the terms. The sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility. In a law office overlooking the park, April Carter held a business card that felt like a key to her future. In a tech empire's headquarters, Samuel Montgomery began the unfamiliar process of loosening his grip on control. Neither knew it yet, but both had taken the first steps on a path that would lead them not just to separation, but to transformation. The offices of Caldwell and Ross hummed with the familiar energy April remembered from her early legal days. Walking through the sleek corridors, her heels clicking against polished floors, she felt a surge of confidence she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't a social appearance or a charity function. This was her element. The Anderson case. Files you requested, her new assistant said, falling into step beside her. And Mr. Walker called. He wants to discuss the foundation partnership over lunch. April accepted the files with a nod. 1 week into her role as head of the Social Justice Division, and already the work felt like coming home. Her office, with its wall of windows and view of the city, couldn't have been more different from the gilded cage she'd left behind. Ms. Carter, a young associate, hovered in her doorway. The pro bono committee meeting starts in 5 minutes. Thank you, David. She gathered her notes, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the window. The woman staring back wore a simple but elegant blazer, natural hair styled professionally, no more 3-hour sessions with Samuel's preferred stylist. Every morning when she dressed now, she chose power over perfection. In the conference room, faces turned toward her expectantly. These weren't society wives or corporate donors. They were lawyers, passionate advocates who'd chosen this division for the same reasons she had once chosen law. Let's talk about expanding our reach, she began, her voice strong and clear. I've been reviewing our current cases, and I see 3 areas where we can make immediate impact. Across town, Samuel sat through another crisis management meeting, only half listening to his PR team's recommendations. His attention kept drifting to the newspaper on his desk, specifically to the business section's profile of April's new role at Caldwell and Ross. The return of April Carter to legal practice marks a significant shift in corporate social responsibility, the article read. Her unique perspective, combining high-level corporate experience with a background in civil rights law, positions her to bridge the gap between profit and purpose. Mr. Montgomery? His PR director's voice broke through his thoughts. About the statement we prepared. No more statements. Samuel stood abruptly, startling his team. No more spin. Just let it be. After they filed out, Linda Palmer appeared in his doorway. Finally, taking my advice? She's thriving, he said quietly, gesturing to the newspaper. Without me, despite me. No. Linda settled into a chair. Because of you. Your attempts to contain her showed her exactly how much space she needed to take up. Back at Caldwell and Ross, April's day continued in a whirlwind of meetings and decisions. Each moment reminded her of who she used to be and who she was becoming. Over lunch with Jordan, they hammered out the details of the partnership between his organization and the Children's Hope Foundation. His easy respect for her expertise felt like a balm after years of being subtly undermined. Your insights on expanding legal aid services are exactly what we needed, Jordan said, his admiration professional and warm. I always knew you'd find your way back to this work. April smiled, remembering their law school debates about justice and change. Sometimes you have to lose your way to find it again. The afternoon brought her first major case presentation to the firm's partners. Standing in the boardroom, so different from the charity galas where she'd played the perfect wife, April laid out her strategy for a class action suit against a major corporation's discriminatory hiring practices. Bold move, one of the senior partners commented afterward. Taking on Carlton Industries will ruffle some feathers in your old social circle. Good, April replied firmly. Some feathers need ruffling. As evening fell, she found herself working late, surrounded by case files and possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. Dinner? You need to eat, superhero. Before she could reply, another message appeared from Samuel. Her heart stuttered until she read it. Rebecca Chen delivered your counter-proposal. I've instructed my lawyers to accept all terms, including your seat on the Montgomery Tech Board and full control of the foundation. You built it. It's yours. April stared at the message, feeling the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. No fight, no control tactics, just acceptance. She typed back simply, "Thank you." Looking out at the city lights, April felt the last pieces of her new life falling into place. The woman who had dimmed her light for love was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned that true love, whether from a partner or from life itself, never required shrinking. Her phone buzzed again. Maggie. Hello? Food? Don't make me come drag you out of that office. April smiled, gathering her things. One chapter of her life had ended, but this new one was just beginning. And this time, she was writing it on her own terms. On my way, she texted back. And Maggie, thank you for never letting me forget who I am. The city stretched out below her office, alive with energy and possibility. Somewhere out there, Samuel Montgomery was learning to let go. But April Carter, she was learning to soar. The Carlton Industries case file landed on April's desk with a satisfying thud. 2 months into her role at Caldwell and Ross, she'd built a reputation for taking on the cases others deemed too risky. This one, a class action suit challenging decades of discriminatory hiring practices, would be her biggest yet. The board of directors meeting starts in 10 minutes. David reminded her, hovering in the doorway. And Mr. Walker sent over the latest statistics from the Foundation's legal aid program. April nodded, gathering her materials. The Montgomery Tech board meeting would be her first since the divorce settlement. Her first time facing Samuel not as his wife, but as an equal stakeholder in the company's future. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt different now. No longer was she arriving as Mrs. Montgomery, the decorative spouse. She was April Carter, attorney and board member, with a voice that demanded to be heard. Samuel was already there. When she entered the boardroom, engaged in quiet conversation with Linda Palmer, he looked different. The rigid perfectionism that had defined him seemed softened somehow, though his suit was still impeccable. April. He acknowledged her with a slight nod. No power play, no attempt to establish dominance. Just professional courtesy. She took her seat, spreading out her notes. The other board members filtered in, and April noticed their curious glances. They were waiting for drama, for tension. Instead, they got something unexpected. Collaboration. The Tech Education Initiative needs expansion, April stated during her presentation. Our initial programs showed promising results, but we're only reaching a fraction of underserved communities. Agreed. Samuel's voice surprised everyone. I've been reviewing the data. Your original vision was more comprehensive than what we implemented. Perhaps it's time to revisit that. The meeting continued, professional and productive. Afterward, as April gathered her things, Samuel approached her desk. You were right, he said quietly. About the education initiative. About a lot of things. It's not about being right, April replied, meeting his gaze. It's about doing right. He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. The therapy is helping, making me see things differently. Before April could respond, her phone buzzed. The Carlton Industries legal team requesting a meeting. She had another battle to fight, another wrong to right. That evening, Samuel sat in his therapist's office, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. Dr. Harrison's calm presence had become a constant in his weekly routine, helping him unravel years of learned behavior. You saw April today, Dr. Harrison noted. How did that feel? Different. Samuel considered the question carefully. Seeing her in her element, confident, making real change. It made me realize how much I tried to contain that, how much I would have lost if I had succeeded. Loss can be a powerful teacher. I'm not sure I've lost her, Samuel said slowly. I lost ownership of her, yes, but maybe that's making room for something else. Something real. Across town, April sat in her office late into the night, building her case against Carlton Industries. The evidence was damning. Years of qualified candidates passed over, clear patterns of discrimination hidden behind corporate policy. Her phone lit up with a message from Jordan. Amazing results from the Foundation's first quarter. Dinner to celebrate? April smiled but typed back, rain check, deep in case prep. Jordan's response came quickly. Of course. The April Carter I remember always did put justice first. It's good to have you back. Those words stayed with her as she worked, reminding her of who she'd been before Samuel, who she was becoming now. The Carlton Industries case wasn't just about discrimination. It was about power, about the right to exist fully in spaces that wanted to diminish you. She understood that fight intimately now. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Maggie stood there, holding takeout bags. You missed dinner. Again. The Carlton case. We'll still be there after you eat. Maggie set the food down, decisively. Besides, I come bearing news. Richard called today. April looked up sharply. Maggie's ex-husband had been as controlling as Samuel, but without the redemptive self-awareness. What did he want? To apologize. Maggie sank into a chair. Apparently, seeing your story in the press made him reflect on his own behavior. He's in therapy now. People can change, April said softly, thinking of Samuel's quiet acknowledgement in the boardroom. Some people, Maggie corrected. The ones who are brave enough to face themselves. She opened the takeout containers, filling the office with the aroma of Thai food. Now eat. Justice tastes better on a full stomach. Later that night, April found herself standing at her office window, much like she used to stand in Samuel's. But the view felt different now. The city wasn't a reminder of power and control. It was a landscape of possibility, of lives waiting to be changed. Her phone buzzed one last time. Samuel. The board approved full funding for the Education Initiative expansion. It's yours to lead if you want it. No strings attached. She smiled, typing back, I'll think about it. Because that was the difference now. Every choice was hers to make. Every path was hers to choose. And tomorrow, she would walk into a courtroom and fight for others to have those same choices. The Carlton Industries case files waited on her desk, a mountain of evidence and opportunity. April Carter had spent 3 years learning the cost of silence. Now she was ready to make some noise. The morning of the Carlton Industries hearing dawned bright and cold. April stood before the bathroom mirror in her apartment, adjusting her suit jacket, navy blue, crisp, powerful. No designer labels, no society wife polish, just a lawyer ready for battle. Her phone lit up with messages of support. Maggie's go. Get them, Tiger. Jordan's thoughtful. You've got this. And surprisingly, one from Samuel. They won't know what hit them. The courthouse steps were crowded with press. April climbed them steadily, her legal team flanking her, the plaintiffs, 23 individuals representing hundreds more, following behind. Their stories of discrimination and lost opportunities had fueled her late nights and early mornings for months. Inside the courtroom, Carlton Industries' legal team projected confidence, their expensive suits and smug smiles reminding April of countless corporate dinners at Samuel's side. But now she saw them differently. Power wasn't about intimidation, it was about truth. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear and strong, this case is about more than statistics and spreadsheets. It's about human dignity, about talent squandered, and dreams deferred because they came in the wrong package. As she presented her evidence, years of hiring data, internal memos, testimony from former employees, April felt the energy in the courtroom shift. This wasn't just another discrimination case, this was a reckoning. During the lunch recess, she checked her messages and found another from Samuel. Board meeting emergency. Carlton Industries threatening to pull out of tech partnership. Standing firm with you, some things matter more than money. The support surprised her, but what surprised her more was realizing she didn't need it. The April who had sought Samuel's approval was gone. She'd been replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned that standing alone didn't mean standing lonely. Back in court, Carlton's lead counsel attempted to paint their clients as victims of changing times. In this era of woke culture, he argued, successful companies are being vilified for maintaining high standards. April's rebuttal was surgical. High standards? She pulled up an email from her evidence, like rejecting a Harvard graduate with a decade of experience because, and I quote, she wouldn't fit our corporate culture, or passing over a qualified veteran because his name sounded too ethnic. The room fell silent as she displayed image after image, evidence after evidence. This isn't about woke culture, she continued. This is about human dignity. About talent squandered and dreams deferred because they came in the wrong package. As she spoke, April caught sight of Samuel slipping into the back of the courtroom. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something there she'd never seen during their marriage. Pure, unfiltered respect. The judge's ruling came down like thunder. Carlton Industries would pay damages, restructure their hiring practices, and submit to 5 years of oversight. But it was his closing statement that resonated most. The law, he declared, is not merely about rules and regulations. It's about justice, about ensuring that power, when abused, faces consequences. Outside, the courthouse steps were again crowded with press. April stood with her clients, their victory a testament to persistence and truth. As cameras flashed and questions flew, she felt centered, grounded in who she was and what she fought for. Later that evening, celebrating with her team at a local bar, April received an unexpected call. The managing partner of Caldwell and Ross wanted to fast-track her to named partner. "Your handling of Carlton Industries," he said, "showed exactly the kind of leadership we need." After the call, April stepped outside for air. The city night was alive with possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from Samuel. "Proud of you, not as your ex-husband, as someone who finally understands what real strength looks like." She smiled, typing back, "Thank you, not as your ex-wife, as someone who finally understands what real freedom feels like." The victory over Carlton Industries wasn't just about discrimination. It was about standing ground, about speaking truth to power, about becoming the kind of person who fought for others because someone had once fought for her. April looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, she celebrated not just a legal victory, but a personal one. She had found her voice, and she was never going to be silent again. 3 months after the Carlton Industries victory, April sat in her doctor's office, staring at the ultrasound screen in stunned silence. The steady rhythm of 3 distinct heartbeats filled the room. "Triplets," Dr. Wilson confirmed, smiling. "All looking healthy and strong." April's hand trembled as it rested on her still flat stomach. The dizziness and fatigue she'd attributed to overwork suddenly made perfect sense. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." The doctor pointed to 3 clear shapes on the screen. "Would you like to know the gender?" "Yes," April whispered, her mind already racing ahead to the implications, the changes, the conversations to come. "All girls." Outside the medical building, April sat in her car, trying to process the news. 3 babies, 3 little girls. Her phone showed missed calls from both Maggie and Jordan. Lunch plans she'd have to cancel, but it was Samuel's number she found herself dialing. "Can we meet? It's important." They agreed on neutral ground, a quiet cafe in the West Village where they'd had their first date years ago. April arrived first, ordering herbal tea instead of her usual coffee. When Samuel walked in, she noticed the changes in him immediately. The rigid set of his shoulders had softened. He looked lighter. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. No power plays, no attempt to control the situation, just genuine concern. April took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." Samuel's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something deeper. "You're triplets," she added quietly. 3 girls. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Samuel stared at his hands on the table, processing. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been seeing Dr. Harrison twice a week," he said finally, "learning to understand why I needed so much control, why I tried to make you smaller, to feel bigger myself." "Samuel, please let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've learned that real strength isn't about power over others. It's about power over yourself, about choosing to be better." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that these girls, our daughters, they'll have a father who understands that now." April felt tears welling in her own eyes. I have conditions. Of course you do. A small smile played at his lips. You're April Carter. They'll never feel like they have to dim their light for anyone. They'll see their mother working, fighting for what's right, being true to herself. I wouldn't want anything less. And you'll continue therapy. This isn't about us getting back together. This is about being the best parents we can be. Samuel nodded. I know, and April, thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Our daughters will be lucky to have you as their mother. Later that evening, April sat in her office at Caldwell & Ross, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold. Her hand rested on her stomach, imagining the 3 tiny lives growing there. Her phone buzzed with messages as she shared the news. Maggie, 3? Girl, your overachieving is getting out of hand. I called dibs on coolest aunt ever. Jordan, congratulations, April. Those girls are going to have one incredible mother. Linda Palmer, just heard from Samuel. If those girls have half your spirit and half his drive, they're going to change the world. The nameplate on her desk caught the fading light. April Carter Partner. Next week, they'd add her name to the firms. Caldwell, Ross and Carter. She'd fought her way back to herself, rediscovered. Her voice rebuilt her life on her own terms. And now the real adventure was beginning. Her phone buzzed one more time. Samuel just ordered 3 copies of Baby's First Law books. Too soon? April laughed, really laughed, for the first time since leaving the doctor's office. Maybe they weren't meant to be husband and wife, but parents. That was a different kind of partnership, one based on respect, understanding, and the wisdom they'd both gained through loss. The city lights began to twinkle as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, 3 little girls were growing stronger every day, preparing to enter a world where their mother had fought for justice, their father had learned to be better, and both had discovered that true power came from lifting others up, not holding them down. April touched her stomach again, smiling. Well, little ones, she whispered, looks like we're in for quite an adventure. The private room at Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed with quiet energy as April Carter held her daughters for the first time. Trinity, Hope and Faith, each perfect, each unique, each already showing hints of the strong women they would become. They're beautiful, Samuel whispered, standing beside the bed with an expression of pure wonder. Gone was the controlling CEO, replaced by a man who understood that life's greatest gifts couldn't be managed or controlled. Maggie snapped photos, tears streaming down her face. Trinity's definitely got April's nose. And look at Hope's little frown. That's all Samuel right there. The past 6 months had transformed both parents in unexpected ways. April had continued working until her 8th month, arguing cases while balancing 3 active babies under her heart. Samuel had channeled his organizational skills into preparing for the triplets, researching everything from organic baby products to progressive early education programs. Remember, April had told him during one of their co-parenting planning sessions, we're raising them to be themselves, not who we think they should be. Now, watching him cradle Faith with such gentle care, April knew he'd taken those words to heart. A soft knock at the door announced Jordan's arrival, bearing 3 tiny gift bags. A little something for the future world changers, he said, setting them down. His smile was warm, supportive, the smile of a friend who had watched April's journey from beginning to end. The Foundation's legal aid program helped 50 families last month, he reported, knowing April would want to hear even from her hospital bed. Your legacy's already growing. Samuel looked up from Faith's sleeping face. Speaking of legacies, the board approved the new parental leave policy. 6 months paid leave for all employees, regardless of gender or position. Your idea? April asked, surprised. Inspired by you, he corrected. You showed me that real leadership is about lifting people up, not holding them down. Linda Palmer arrived next, carrying what looked suspiciously like case files, along with her baby gifts. "Don't worry," she said, catching April's expression. "These can wait until you're ready. But that tech discrimination case isn't going to argue itself. 3 weeks, April stated firmly. Then we'll talk cases." The room filled with laughter. Everyone there knew April Carter well enough to know she'd probably be reviewing files by tomorrow. As evening fell and visitors departed, April and Samuel found themselves alone with their daughters. The city. Lights twinkled beyond the window, the same lights they'd both stared at so many times during their journey. But now they saw them through new eyes. "I was so wrong," Samuel said softly, watching Trinity grasp his finger. "About what strength meant, about what love meant." "We both had to learn," April replied. "Me about not losing myself in someone else's vision. You about not trying to control everything." "They'll be better for it," he said. "For it. They'll grow up seeing their mother's strength, their father's growth. They'll know they never have to choose between power and authenticity." April looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "They'll have questions someday about why we're not together but still a family. And we'll tell them the truth," Samuel said, "that sometimes love means letting go. That respect is more important than romance. That their parents learned to be better people by facing their fears and failures." Faith stirred, her tiny face scrunching up before relaxing. April felt tears well up in her eyes, not from sadness or regret, but from the pure wonder of the moment. "I don't regret it, you know," she said quietly. "Our marriage, the struggles, the growth, it all led us here." Samuel nodded, understanding. "To 3 perfect reasons to be our best selves." The night deepened, and the new family settled into a peaceful rhythm. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, offering support. But in the quiet moments between, April felt the rightness of it all. She was still April Carter, lawyer, advocate, fighter for justice. Now she was also a mother, ready to show her daughters that a woman could be both powerful and nurturing, both successful and vulnerable. Samuel had found his own balance, still a brilliant CEO, but now one who understood that true leadership came from empathy, not authority. The man who had once demanded submission now offered support. The one who had tried to dim her light now helped it shine. And their daughters, they would grow up knowing they were born from strength, not the strength of a perfect marriage, but the strength of 2 people who learned to be better, who chose growth over comfort, truth over pretense. Outside, Manhattan continued its eternal dance of lights and shadows. But inside this room, 3 new lights had joined the world. 3 girls who would never have to dim their shine, never have to choose between power and authenticity, never have to be less to make someone else feel more. Trinity, Hope, and Faith Carter Montgomery, daughters of 2 people who had lost their way only to find a better one. Proof that endings could be beginnings, that love could evolve, that the greatest power of all was the courage to change. April held her daughters close, breathing in their newborn scent. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she'd first married Samuel, but it was better, richer, truer, freer. It was a future built not on control or submission, but on respect and understanding. A future where 3 little girls would grow up knowing that love, real love, never required dimming your light. It was, April knew, exactly the future they were all meant to find. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.